Boker Tov, good morning. Today is Friday, March 5th, Erev Shabbat, Parshat Ki Tisa, Parshat Parah. I want to draw our attention to the latter part of this very significant parsha, which perhaps is most well known for the story of the golden calf, and then for Moshe's efforts on the part of the Jewish people to plead their case. And then God teaching Moshe the 13 attributes of mercy, and then Moshe, and then sort of reiterating some of the covenantal bond that God will keep with the Jewish people. And Moshe, eventually, after 40 days up on the mountain a second time, comes down from the mountain and is described thus: Vayihi beredet Moshe mihar Sinai shnei l'chodedu Moshe beredeto min hahar. And it was when Moshe descended from Mount Sinai, and the two tablets of testimony were in his hand on his descent from the mountain. Moshe lo yada ki karan or panav v'dabro ito. And Moshe did not know that the skin of his face was radiating, was glowing. V'dabro ito, as God spoke to him. And the simple explanation is that somehow, involved in conversation with God as he was, that had its impact directly from God. Directly from God. The Midrash offers other explanations and asks the question: Mehechan natal Moshe karnei hod? Where did Moshe draw and take these rays of glory that's shown off of him? There are three explanations offered. The last of them was that shenishtayer min dio or kima. Oh, this is a slightly confusing version of the text. Shenishtayer komus kima. There was a little bit of ink left in the komos, in the quill with which he seemingly wrote the Torah. We'll put aside the question exactly how much the Torah did Moshe write. Did he indeed write, from start to finish, or just up to that point in time? But Moshe wrote the Torah, and we're going to allow ourselves to think the entirety. So we're told that there was a little bit of ink left in that, in the quill after writing the Torah. Beviro al Rosho, and he wiped himself across his brow, and so the little bit of ink that was left was what shone off his forehead, or impacted his glow, which means that on the face of it, every pun intended, Moshe receives this or emanates from the Torah. But you have here on top of this drasha, another drasha which I shared with one of my classes earlier this week, is an extra piece, namely. How is it that Moshe has any ink left over? We want to imagine for ourselves that everything should work out perfectly and exactly. Moshe wrote down just what he needed to write down, all the words of the Torah. So there should be, when Moshe finishes that last letter, Le'inei Kol Yisrael, that Lamed, he should then take his quill and touch it to his hand, and there'll be nothing left. We want to imagine that, right? So why is there any ink left over? So Rabbi Heschel offers an explanation, which I don't remember. I've heard before. Maybe I heard it in his name. And so this is the Hasidic Rabbi Heschel, who says that, well, there's one extra possibility here where that ink comes from, because Moshe was told by God God told Aaron and Miriam that Moshe was the most modest man in the world, and Moshe had to write those words down. That he was anav ma'od, he was exceedingly humble, and it made him uncomfortable. And if you look how the words are written in the Torah, anav is written chaser, missing a yud, instead of being malay with the yud in the word. And the suggestion is, right, he does so because he's too humble to write that he's humble. And it's that little bit of ink that should have been written in the Torah, but Moshe just couldn't bring himself to add, that is therefore left over in his quill, and he touches it on his forehead, and it's from there that his rays of glory come from. What does that mean? So is it then just that, oh, leftover Torah ink is what somehow emanates? Or is it, if we sit in this drasha to its fullest, that ultimately what makes Moshe shine is his humility, is his recognition that our recognition about him, that about what a special person he is, and what makes him so special is that he's doesn't flaunt anything. He doesn't carry himself with arrogance, doesn't lord himself over others, doesn't push his way around, and instead he's quite humble about everything that he does, even about and how he allows God to refer to him. And the proof's in the pudding, really, from the entire section that we read beforehand, where God says, "I'll start all over with you," right? I'll start all over with you. I'll wipe out the people of Israel, and I'll start with you. And Moshe says, "No, if that's what you're going to do, wipe me out of your book." Mecheni nami sifracha, right? Because it's not about me at all. I'm here for them, and that's what it's about. So when Moshe comes down the mountain with the two set of tablets, it's a triumphant Moshe. His triumph is that he has succeeded in protecting the Jewish people and re-engaging God and Am Yisrael once more, and he could indeed bask in that, or he can be modest in that even then, and then it's all about the accomplishments that this humble man has made, not for himself but for others. We're living in a time, we're living in an era in which public figures sometimes are knocked down a peg or more because of the arrogant way in which they hold themselves, in which they carry themselves, in which they push themselves and bully sometimes even a lot of other good that they might be doing, but how they act with others in lots of different ways that ultimately will be their downfall, because they might be too conscious of and living in their power instead of with the humility they should have. I'm thinking about even what's going on in Israel right now, where the Supreme Court of Israel has ruled, as it did, that conversions outside of the Orthodox realm will be recognized for the purposes of citizenship in Israel. That has already been the case for conversions outside of Israel, now conversions inside of Israel as well. And there was a hue and cry, a hue and cry in the Haredi world about this, partially because this is a situation of their own making. That's really why they're not able to recognize that, but it is a situation of their own making for being so difficult in the ways in which somebody who seeks to become Jewish is dealt with by these Batei Din. And so it's because they've held themselves and insisted on a tight hold and so strict and restricting. This is not an unexpected result of that. And then related to this, right? So that's sort of how you carry yourself, with sort of the certainty in a way which is dismissive of others. And so this is where it comes back to you. And most horrifyingly tragic was what emerged from certain quarters in the Haredi political world, where reform movement individuals would be compared, in effect, to the most mocked versions of things. The bar mitzvah, if you remember the horrifying story where people were making bar mitzvahs for their dogs, and they put out an ad this week, associating bar mitzvahs basically with the reform movement in a way which was nothing but dismissive of everything about reform leadership. Now, we have much in which about which we disagree with the other streams of Judaism, core essential questions. But one thing that we've come to learn, and we certainly know, is that there are people of deep spiritual commitments and integrity that should be affirmed for that, and never, God forbid, dismissed and disparaged in the way that's happened there. I don't know what Moshe Rabbeinu would do in our world. Who knows? But the Moshe Rabbeinu we met, that makes him so significant, is the Moshe who fought for every single Jew, who didn't allow the disparaging of Israel, even when Israel when they failed, they make a case before God for them instead of a case against them before God, and that's part of the humility of Moshe, and that's where his glory comes. We have much to learn from Moshe, and pray that we do in every quarter in every place in which Jews live and reside together. Have a Shabbat Shalom.